So, I realized, actually, I had a conversation with someone concerning my very first video podcast. I had a discussion about accountability in hip hop. And what I realized after our conversation, shout out to my guy Josh. What I realized after that conversation is that my point of view is not limited to. Let me backtrack. I believe that there's a larger discussion within humanity based on responsibility and accountability, assumed responsibility and accountability, that I feel is very much one of the cornerstones of how our existence evolves or revolves. So I'll say this. I think that ego plays a large role in what is deemed to be, or what a person is deemed to be accountable or responsible for, and how we shade that ego or that self-characterization or what we think about ourselves and how much power and influence we actually have is what we're comfortable taking accountability for or responsibility for. I will continue to. I acknowledge influence. Let me start there. Like, I acknowledge that certain entities are influential. I also acknowledge that certain entities can amplify influence with scientific knowledge of how humanity works. Psychological advantages, just advancement in recognizing patterns and being able to take advantage of said patterns by repeating them or withholding them to increase or amplify said influence. And is the influence really the power at play, or the manipulation of the influence really the power at play? Again, these things are multi-layered when you're trying to determine ultimately who or what is responsible. And I think that's my issue. My issue is there are some people that have inherent accountability and responsibility, no matter their level of influence. Sometimes it depends on your sphere of influence. Like, who are you actually influencing? And do you have a responsibility to those people with what you're influencing them to do or to be or to believe? Do you control said influence? Do you control what you're influencing them? Again, most people are going to take accountability and responsibility for whatever it is they feel comfortable saying that they're influential with, whatever that message is or whatever that behavior is. But people don't often lean into the fact that there are a lot of things that influence our atmosphere in ways that we don't intend, in ways that we don't even know. And again, this is my problem with actually trying to hold anyone accountable after a certain space or time, because ultimately we all have a choice. Now, sometimes you may be too immature in your mental state and capacity to recognize that you have a choice, or to feel like your only choice is to do what you've been told to do or influenced to do. And I don't want to get too far off the subject, because this topic spins into a whole other philosophical debate. It really is at the core of my belief system when it comes to existence, life, period, in the universe. I believe everything is about balance. And I believe whatever narrative that you use to explain how balance in the universe is obtained, maintained, how equilibrium shifts and gets back to, zero, that's fine if that helps for comprehension or faith or understanding. But at the end of the day, it's all about balance. And there's no refuting or dispelling another person's beliefs, because that's what they were exposed to and what they chose to have faith in. But it doesn't make anyone's belief more or less valid. But the crux of all of these faiths and religions, including science, which I believe is a faith and religion, are all centered around some type of balance. Okay, so back to this influence and accountability and responsibility. So in a more to give an example, I'm a son, I'm a sibling, and I'm a father. And I'm an older brother. Let's put that out there. I'm an older brother. I'm the first son. I'm a father of 6 beautiful brown babies, all brown, 3 kings and 3 queens. Like, I've seen what influence, I've experienced influence, and I've experienced being influenced. And what I can say is, this gamut that I'm speaking about, I can recognize those things happening, or me experiencing those things, all within my short existence. And I'm talking about my direct commentary influencing someone, my direct commentary influencing someone to do the opposite, my direct commentary not being followed or being ignored totally, and not opposite or for, but just not even being considered, not even listened to. My behavior having an influence that I didn't even know was actually in existence. I believe that those ripples, there may be some influence that the people that I'm around don't even know is or recognize that they're influenced by, and it won't come out until the future at their point of reflection or arrival at, a conclusion that, man, I did this because I saw this, or because I heard this, or because I grew up in this. I'm not a product of of divorce, but I saw it firsthand in my family. I've been divorced. So I have children, biological children with one woman, but I have children with two beautiful queens. They're amazing. I have nothing negative to say, but with that being said, my children have seen and have experienced a life, while I feel like it's full of love, and me and their mothers did our damnedest to, in our opinion, I mean, we're not perfect, but we tried our best to our knowledge and our energy level to provide a loving relationship and a loving environment, and to promote family regardless of the genetics, but more because of the love. But there are side effects that may or may not be intended. There are morals and guidelines that are shaped because of those actions that, although I wanted them to be positive, they may be negative. They may create a mindset in my daughters or my sons and how they view family, how they view their own sexuality in regards to, their, domain and dominion over their body. What is acceptable? How many, just the family structure and what love looks like. Like, I meant no harm or any destructive intent with my actions, but I don't control that, right? But I also understand that because of these titles that I hold, that I am accountable and responsible to a certain degree for what my influence is on those people, because it's deemed that way, right? The people that I touch on a regular basis that are exposed to me, and it doesn't mean just the ones that I talk to, just the ones that see me, the ones that listen to me, the ones that don't. Like, there is a level of influence, but I may not be accountable or responsible to those people because they're not my family. Now, in a work setting, those are my patients, or those are people that I interact with, my coworkers. Like, again, I may or may not have influence on them. And there may be certain things that I can change about their daily experience, but I'm not accountable to them in the same way that I may be to my children, or to my brother, or to my parents, or to the mothers of my children. Like, there's a different space, and it's not the same. So when I have a conversation about artistic individuals or artistic expression, there's influence. There's no denying that there's influence. But that person is a stranger. They may not even be in the same country. They don't have they're not accountable or responsible to you because they have no connection to you other than something that they decided to put out for the world, and you decided to expose yourself to it. Or maybe not. Maybe it was so popular that it was on everywhere and you couldn't get away from it. But either way, they're not accountable and responsible to you. They don't have any relationship to you. Now, if you want to put this on a macro level, I believe, if you're talking about humanity, then you change the whole narrative of this conversation. And you can't, by any stretch of the imagination, focus on hip hop. Or let's really say focus on Black or African American or African influence, right? It's funny how, and this was part of my distaste for the conversation that was going on. It's amazing how they have no problem pinning negative influence and focusing it on something that's clearly African American or Black within its expression, right? But the fact that hip hop is so large, they'll say it's a global expression, it's multi-ethnic, and all these people have taken part and contributed to it. But when it's negative, we're talking about you're in the hood and it's Black people and it's all this other stuff. They're not talking about any reggaeton artists. They're not talking about any of that stuff. They're talking about Black people in the projects and the traps, talking about selling drugs and fucking bitches and hoes and all this other stuff. They will focus, and without saying it, they're saying you Black people or you niggas are responsible for your own demise and the demise of anybody who takes part in what you're doing. But when it's positive and they want to, big up something that's clearly as Black as it was when they said it was negative, everyone has had a part in it. Everybody's taken part in it. Everybody is a contributor to it. We don't own the genre. We don't have domain and dominion over that. And that's funny and coincidental to me. Because either we're the source or we're not. Either we're the source or we're not. Now, when I start to have that conversation and you talk about influence and you talk about responsibility and accountability, see, there's a reason why they try to segregate and separate levels of responsibility and accountability, period, because then you have to give credit, then you have to acknowledge, then you have to say and admit to a lot of the things that are happening. And it's not a conspiracy, it just makes sense. A lot of the things that have happened in history, recorded history, and why they happened, where the fear of a black planet, shout out to Chuck D and Public Enemy, if that's actually a real thing. Excuse me, and I'm trying to stay on topic. We're talking about accountability and responsibility and where it actually lies, and why I feel like it's a larger conversation, but the conversation surrounding hip hop is a microcosm of how those terms are manipulated. And as a person, shout out to Josh again, as a person, you can, in your mind, assume accountability and responsibility. But again, that doesn't make you accountable and responsible. That's your conscience, which is guiding your actions, good, bad, or indifferent, to have a positive effect on whatever it is that you are deeming that you're accountable or responsible for, right? Now, you can turn that inward and say, I'm only accountable and responsible for my actions and the intent of my actions. And that is where I lie. I feel like I am responsible for the intent of what it is that I am doing on a daily basis. Period. I don't have any power or domain outside of me. There may be influence. And, again, being a older brother and having children, understanding that even if I didn't want to, I influenced and gave direction one way or the other to the younger people that were around me, that all they perceived to have was me or their parents as an example, or me as their parent as the example. And again, because that's my brother or those are my children, I do have a certain level of accountability and responsibility to them up to a certain extent. Once they are mature enough to understand that they have a choice. And again, this doesn't mean that they're making the correct choice. It just means that once they recognize that they have a choice, now they become accountable and responsible to themselves. I'm accountable to and responsible to myself, my choices, and what I choose to put out there. But I'm not accountable and responsible to someone who's accountable and responsible to themselves. So when you're on a TV show and you say, I did drugs because of this, or, a young Italian kid says, I think I should join the mafia because I saw Goodfellas. Or if, Mexican American says, I need to join a gang because I saw American Me. La Raza and things of that nature. Like, it's good to acknowledge that those things had influence, but you still had a decision to make. I mentioned something in my conversation with my guy, and I said, people really had a problem when they heard Kanye say slavery was a choice, because in their estimation, it's like, be a slave or die, or be a slave or watch your child or your mother or your wife, go through horrendous, torture or pain, or watch them get killed, right? So we automatically say, obviously there is no choice, because if I love them, I'm going to do what I'm told to do. But that's the point. The point is you actually have a choice. You chose something because you felt responsible for that person's well-being, but you still made a choice, because you could have said, nah, fuck that, I'm going to die. Or nah, fuck that, I'm going to fight. And it's not shade. It's not shade. It's not saying that there's something wrong with you or you're weak because you didn't choose to fight or die. It just means literally that there was a choice. And that's the reality of all of this, is that at a certain point, we all come to realize we've all had a choice the entire time. Once we realize our power of free will, then you are accountable and responsible to yourself, no matter what the influence is. Psychologically, yes, some things are very powerful, but at the end, there's always a choice. The concrete fact is, and even if somebody puts a gun to your head, it's still a decision. You're choosing to live over choosing to die. Or the idea of death over the idea of living. Vice versa, excuse me. So, And I'm sure that this conversation will lead to other realms, like even within this conversation, it led to other stuff. But, in this space where we're talking about accountability and responsibility, I just feel as if for fodder or for favor, we choose to step into that power or that position of power or that acknowledgement of power when it comes to free will, when it serves us, when it serves our ego, right? Because everybody wants to take credit for being the good guy. Nobody wants to take credit for being the bad guy, especially to those that we care about and love the most. Now, there are some faith or religious and not from my, there are some places that I'm going to go with this conversation that are going to be uncomfortable for people, but unfortunately it just, this is my truth, and, it may ring worthy of someone's attention and relevant, but, my point of view is I just don't think everything is admittedly what people make it out to be. And there's a purpose. There's a reason why it's like that people don't want to or choose to acknowledge certain aspects of reality and what it is that we're experiencing on a regular basis. And it's just hard for me as an observer to not acknowledge these things that are pretty obvious. Yeah, I know definitely this is going to serve as a springboard into just some deep conversations that I'm going to share. But yeah, influence, accountability, responsibility, ego, all of these things are intertwined in a way that, when you unravel it and actually draw straight lines, it's very clear what's actually going on. And, adults invent a gray area so they can wade in it, because if we're just talking about good and bad, or the perception of good and bad, or the perception of good and evil, realistically, it's a yin and yang. You can't have a circle without the yin or the yang. You need both. You need the light and the dark. You need balance. And I think consciously mankind just has a problem understanding that both are necessary and not leaning into one or the other more because of what it gives them. When it feeds their ego, when it makes them feel good about being them and their idea of who they are as a person, that's usually what a person's going to lean into, good or bad. You're fine taking the credit for being accountable and responsible for the positive things. And then when redemption or acknowledgement of transgression is serves as an ego boost, then you lean into the fact that you had dark stages, or if you're on that side and it makes you feel good about who you are to acknowledge those things that are darker, you're going to lean into that. But nobody, again, I don't think people are as quick to lean into the fact that they may have had influence that they don't actually know, and therefore they can't take credit for it. Therefore, it doesn't serve the ego. And, you know, again, we're choosing to be accountable and responsible in a lot of places that we don't have accountability or responsibility, even with our own children, even with our own family members. Like, we want to say that, you know, for whatever reason and however it serves our ego, we want to take responsibility and say we had the power to, and because this happened, I'm responsible, I'm accountable to that, when really you're not. You may have had an influence. You may have been an influence, a source of influence within that decision, but it doesn't mean that you're responsible for it, because that person or persons still had a decision to make, and they chose what they chose. You know, so when you're thinking about these things, like, you know, maybe ask yourself, does it serve you to say that you're accountable or you're responsible for these things? Are you really accountable and responsible for these things at a certain time in people's lives? And I don't even think you determine that. I think it's self-determined. I think, again, when an individual matures to the point where they realize or they recognize that they have a choice, they then become self-accountable and responsible to themselves, because now they understand that they have a decision to make. They may not be the wisest. It doesn't mean that they're the smartest. It doesn't mean that they're going to make the right decision. But once they realize that there's a decision that they can make, they then become responsible for that. Now, you know, and you can't even say, you know, because they're not mature enough, because they don't know enough, then they can't. No, it just means that they need more knowledge, but they still have a choice. That's a fact. You can't remove that. You can't, you know, alleviate that as a fact just because they're ignorant. You know, and when I say ignorant, like, that just means they don't have the knowledge or they don't have the wisdom. They still have a choice. All of us have a choice. Once we have the knowledge and the recognition that there is a choice to be made, that you can go left or right. And I guess that's what I'm saying. I think that, you know, this assigning of accountability and responsibility is just a little bit, there's profit and power in how they're doing what they're doing. And I feel like it's, for me and my platform, you know, and who I am in my thought process, I think it's important for me to speak to those things and to offer my perspective, because I think it's valid. So until the next time.